This is Kyle Hunter and Elijah Fleming with Don't Mean Nothing. We're back at the SOGCast base of operations with the man himself, John Stryker Meyer, aka Tilt. John, I know we left off at your story halfway through your first deployment, but before we get to that, you got some new additions we want to talk about.
Well, yeah, we're on a very personal level. Recently, we acquired this. We had a fundraiser up in Iowa earlier in the year, and they raffled off a Car 15 that this company put together. And so when we're talking, one of the gentlemen, Mr. Woodward, said, "Would you like one?" I said, "Yeah, as a Pope Catholic." Just like, I haven't touched a Car 15 since maybe one day at Fifth Group. They had a weapons day, just went out and fired some rounds to it. But that was the only time since Vietnam, because this is our weapon of choice. There's a Car 15, again, complete with the 20-round magazine. And this was special because they engraved on it the RT Idaho patch and our little symbol that we had on our challenge coins. So they did a beautiful job on it. And so I sent Mr. Woodward a note, and this landed just right before our reunion. So I really haven't had a chance to test fire it yet. But again, it's got the collapsible stock on it. And for our purposes, when we're in the jungle, we always had like some kind of a rope or cloth, so it's quiet. So whenever we move, there's no noise of the weapon. Even when you just clicked it on and off, it's very, very barely a sound. And so like I said, this is all brand new to me, and it's quiet. And so this is my addition to our SOGCast, the base of operations, for security purposes, of course.
Can you tell us a little bit about the size difference between that and like a typical M16?
Yeah, the advantage to this was it has, well, again, it's the collapsible stock, and even when it's full length, it's still shorter than the M16. And we always carried it compacted, and then the barrel is shorter, and then we only had 20-round magazines in the day, and that's what we carried. And we trained ours so that you could literally take the magazine out and replace it with a new one quickly. That's part of our training. And so when we talk about carrying ammo for this, myself, I always carried 600 plus rounds, which would be 30 plus magazines, because we were told that the springs couldn't handle full 20 rounds. So we put 18 in each magazine. So always carried it where I'm moving. You never set it down. And if you're using your hands for a combo check, just always close and ready to roll. And live today, thanks to my car, I had 3 different Car 15s during my time of duty there. And they never malfunctioned. We kept them clean. We came back from missions. And there was at least twice where we had been on the ground in contact, and when we got extracted by the King Bees, the South Vietnamese Air Force, we were down to our last magazine twice that I remember. And other times we were close. And so this baby defended us along with our Thumper, which was the sawed-off M79. And we always carried 10 to 12 rounds for it. And then, of course, 10 to 12 hand grenades. And I always carried the radio. And then the other addition to the base of operations for SOGCast was this portrait done by Special Forces medic Sam McIntyre, who's just an incredible artist. And his depiction here is, he calls it just another day in SOG, which for our team was significant because it was October 7th, 1968. We'd been in contact with the NVA for North Vietnamese Army for over 4 hours. And we're down the last light, and Spider Parks, who was the covey, found a little patch of elephant grass that the King Bee could come hover. He couldn't land. And Captain Tin, you can see the pilot up there looking down at us, going, "Come on, guys." And they hovered, and we threw up each man into the helicopter. And I was the last man off the ground that day. And I went up, and then Dom pulled me in by the rucksack. And so this depicts that mission from Echo 4. And so these are the 2 major additions. And then we had this given to me by Special Forces Chapter 28 out in Kansas. And they did it in conjunction with the Special Operations Directorate. and they have a training program there. And so I was a guest speaker and had worked with Roger Donlin, the first Medal of Honor recipient from Special Forces and during the Vietnam War. He was in attendance there for that event, and just honored to be able to go up there to speak to them. So those are a couple of new additions. And of course, last but not least, we mentioned this before, but anybody who wants more history on our team, in Volume 12 for MACV SOG by Jason Hardy, he has over 170 pages on RT Idaho. And Idaho, during the Secret War, we had 5 recon teams that were from the beginning. And Idaho was one of the first teams. And the team ran missions all the way through to the very end. And that included through times when Idaho was wiped out twice. Once in early 67, and then in May of 68, Glenn Lane and Robert Owen with several dig. The team was inserted, never heard from again. So Spider Parks rebuilt the team. Don Wolken was the assistant team leader, and I was the radio operator. And we rebuilt the team working with Hep and Sal. And Hep was our interpreter. Sal was the Vietnamese team leader. And rebuilt it. And then I had 19 months with 2 tours of duty. Lynn was on the team as the 1-0. Then after I left, there were a couple more 1-0s. But the last American was Ken Beret, who was a first lieutenant when he was on the team, stayed in the service, retired as a 2-star general. And he was the last American. And then Do T Quang, who was with Lynn Black on October 5th when ST Alabama came up against 10,000 NVA. And they came up against an NVA division. And we know that because Lynn Black talked to, many years after the attack, he talked to the officer that launched the ambush on his team, that he survived. And so that mission was October 5th. October 6th, we inserted into Echo 4. And then on October 7th, we were on the ground and made contact around 2 o'clock. And we were in contact with the enemy all the way through the last light, which is this picture here.
One of the things you mentioned at breakfast, we talked about how many times that helicopter was shot while you were...
Oh, yes. The Captain Tin, and after he pulled us out, now we're all out of bullets and out of hand grenades. He pulled us out and went back. We landed at Food Bar. I said, come on in, I want to buy you a drink. He said, no, I have to go home to my family. My wife is waiting dinner for me. So he came back 2 days later, said that King Bee had 48 bullet holes in it. And only by the grace of the Lord, nobody got wounded. And there are holes in the helicopter, some in the props. And it's just one of those, another miracle day. It's just, they call it just another day in SOG. It's a recon team in trouble, and the King Bees came to save the day.
Yeah, it's just incredible just to see the amount of courage that the pilots had just to sit and, wait for you.
I mean, when we're on the ground and people are shooting at you, your pucker factor is, really tight. Mm-hmm. And then that day, what I remember most was after I threw up 1 or 2 of the guys into the helicopter, and I looked up at Captain Tin, and he's just sitting there. I always said, just as cool as a Rocky Mountain spring. And I just couldn't, how does a man do that? Just hovering, waiting for us to get the hell on the helicopter to get out. So yeah, just one of those moments in time you never forget. And Sam did a great job depicting it with his artwork. You can see here's Hep, our interpreter, and then Sal was here. This is Davidson with his back to it, Don Wolken and myself. Either way, but that's the way he did it. It just looks great. So
Incredible work.
Yeah, and we gave Captain Tin has one. Well, he retired as a colonel, so it's Colonel Tin. He has one back at his house now with his son James.
I think the story about Lynn Black and the talking to the officer, that I think was really cool too. If you want to revisit about how he knew he was a radio operator, or he asked about him.
Well, yeah. Again, we're going back to October 5th, when the team leader was inexperienced. He had been in Germany, but he hadn't been in Vietnam or Laos, and this is his first mission. And when the King Bee landed, the team got on the ground. And Lynn Black, who had prior experience, said, hey, we just see an NVA flag here. The second helicopter received weapons fire. And he said, we should call the King Bees back and just go, we're compromised. He says, no, I'm the team leader. Go down this trail. So the team leader, inexperienced, literally walked the team into an ambush. They went down a trail, and there was like a rise in front and to the side. The NVA had time to put 50 soldiers up there to ambush the recon team. So upon contact, they killed the team leader, they killed the point man, and later in the day, someone else was wounded. And this battle went on. At one point, they were stacking up the dead NVA and hiding behind that. And Lynn Black was able to get everybody together. One more team member died right before they got extracted. And 20 years or 25 years later, the U.S. government was going back to try to find the American team leader. And Lynn had talked with them. He got a phone call. And it was a general from the North Vietnamese army called him and said, hey, I heard you were on that mission. And they talked for a few minutes, and they confirmed that they had been there. And the guy told him we had 50 men for that ambush. And so at the end of the conversation, Lynn goes, you know, that was a bad day for us. We lost 3 men of the 9-man team. Everybody else, except for one other team member, was wounded, seriously wounded. Lynn had been knocked out. He had suffered a concussion from a hand grenade that destroyed his Car 15, made it inoperable. And they all ran out of bullets. They began picking up their AK-47s from the dead NVA soldiers. And they said, we had a bad day. And the NVA goes, well, we had a bad day too. You know, that between your team and TAC Air and the Army gunships and the Marine Corps gunships from Scarface, said, you know, you inflicted 90% casualties on our unit that day. Lynn goes, 90%. He said, well, we saw the flag. We assumed it was a battalion, 3,000. And the general goes, no, it was an NVA division of 10,000 men. So one recon team combined with TAC Air gave them that 90% casualty ratio, which was just amazing. And then at the very end, the general goes, oh, by the way, who was the radio operator? Because when the firefight started in the ambush, the whole team went to the ground and fired up. Lynn just stood there immediately shooting people up on the rise, and changed magazines, kept going. And Lynn said, well, that was me. I was the radio operator. He said, yeah, you stood up, everybody went to the ground. He says, yeah. And he goes, you shot me 3 times. That's one of my all-time favorite stories. And somehow he lived to talk about it. Because when I talked to Lynn, he said, yeah, you know, I remember I shot a couple of guys up there. I shot them, they spun around. I had to shoot them 2 or 3 times to get them to go down. And then the general goes, the worst part of it, I lied there watching you kill my men. I couldn't do anything because I was so severely wounded. But that's just one of those little, just another day in SOG.
Wow. Unbelievable.
One of our classic stories for sure.
So let's pick up where you left off. We were halfway through your first deployment. We were first or second week of December, I believe. It's right after. I mean, if you want to recap.
Yeah, we had talked about the Thanksgiving Day mission for us, which was we had been temporary duty, TDY, down to FOB 6. They were short on teams at the time. And we went down, and the first mission was to find 3 missing NVA divisions. So this is November, right around Thanksgiving, November 28, 68. And they were worried about the NVA massing for another Tet offensive like they had in Tet of 68. And CIA, DIA all lost contact. And so the bottom line was we found them. It was Cambodia. And Cambodia vegetation was much more thinner. We literally walked into a base camp, and then one of the point element and the tail element came back and literally chased us back to the LZ. And the Green Hornets that were our close air support there came in with their miniguns, suppressed some of the fire. We had our weapons, the M79, claymores, and a couple times we had claymores with 5-second fuses as we were retreating back to the LZ. And last light we got out. I'm not last light, but right down to the last couple of seconds in time. And it was just so close. But it was Thanksgiving, we got out. We were very fortunate. And so the reason why we went back to FOB 1 was on November 30th, we had a King Bee that went down with 7 Green Berets that were on an eldest son mission. An eldest son was putting in bad ammo into the area of operations for the North Vietnamese Army. And on this one day, the helicopter was flying, got hit with anti-aircraft rounds, it spun around, and when it crashed, killed everybody. And we had a couple of eyewitnesses that talked about it, and they tried to go back between the weather and the heavy enemy activity. They weren't able to get them out right away. It was a few years later that they finally did recover them all, and they're all buried at Arlington now. So I came back to FOB1, and we ran a mission up in the DMZ, and it was one of those deals where the weather had been bad, but we had an opening. So it was myself, Lynn Black, and Rick Estes, and we had 5 indigenous team members, went into the DMZ. We got inserted, and the point man's son, when he jumped off the helicopter, had lifted up, because sometimes they just couldn't touch down. And when he landed, we thought he broke his ankle. And so I called Cubby, our forward air controller, saying, hey, we got a guy with a broken ankle, we can't move. Come back and exfil, or at least exfil him. And by the time he turned around the helicopters to come back, the weather closed in, and we couldn't get him out. So we're literally stuck. So it was the coldest 5 days of my life. It rained from that night, rest of the time during the days and night, and we're just on the ground for 5 nights. And that was just a cold, nasty mission. And Lynn and Rick Estes went out during the day with a couple of our little people putting out some booby traps and tripwires and stuff in case any of the enemy came up at us. And at night we could hear the enemy moving through the valleys below. So we stayed on the hilltop, and then they finally pulled us out after 5 days. And then we had Christmas, and then I don't even remember if I remember it was Christmas Day or not. But we had a target there.
Before we get to that, let's go back to Son. And talk just a little bit about who he was and his backstory.
Yeah, sure. Son was when we rebuilt the team in May of '68. Son was one of the 3 indigenous young men that we hired. They were all 15 years old. Son, Chow, and Cal. And this is part of the rebuilding process. And so Spider Parks was the team leader then. And of course, I'm just green as grass, green beret, radio operator. So we all learned together as a team. Spider and Sal, who didn't go on that fatal mission, fortunately, and Hep didn't go because he was sick. And Spider had been on the team for several missions, but had gotten promoted to a new team. And so he missed the fatal mission of May of '68. So when the team gets wiped out, they brought Spider back. He rebuilt the team. So with those gentlemen, we all trained them up, everything from how to load, how to pick up your car 15, how to make it quiet so when you move there's no extra noises, to rappelling, doing wiretaps, etc. And of course all of our immediate reaction drills. And went down to the range, you do it live fire over and over again. So if you get hit, you don't have to think about what you're going to do, you just do it. And so thanks to Spider, he done good. Him and Sal, with Hep's help there, we rebuilt it. And Son, of the 3 that we hired, he was the quickest learner. And he had run one mission for us as point. And up to that point, Fook and Sal always did point. But they trained up, they wanted a new guy to do it. And Son was the man. And eventually, in '69, we began to dress him as an NVA. So when he's running point, he'd be dressed with a full NVA gear, with the 3 magazine vest, pith helmet, etc. And the idea being that if he's walking point, if he came into contact with an NVA or any enemy soldier past that Lao, when they would see him with the AK, they would pause trying to figure out who he was. And while they were pausing, Son would whack him and give us the automatic superior firepower at that moment in time. And that's the reasoning behind it. By November, he was a stone cold killer. Just a great recon man and very strong. And, after Vietnam fell in April of '75, I thought the only person that escaped from Vietnam was Hep, the interpreter. He got out with his family on April 30th, 75, the day of the collapse, when the NVA went into Saigon. And I was just recently had the privilege of being with Lynn again at his house in Washington State. I was up there with Dick Thompson, AKA Dynamite, codename Dynamite, my little buddy. Anyway, all three of us were at FOB1. We were all at CCN, and we were up there along with Rob Graham and his people from the Arma 3 doing the podcast and the video games on SOG Prairie Fire video games, which have been out there. They're working on a new game, and now they're working on a documentary. So we're up there. I'm talking to Lynn. And at one point, his wife, Judith, goes, Lynn, did you tell Tilt about Sun? I'm going, Sun? And it turns out they were in some little community not too far away. And they went in, and they were carrying, he either had a jacket or something. And the Vietnamese man behind the counter goes, were you in SOG? And that leads to one question to another. And finally he goes, yeah, my dad was in SOG. It turns out to be it was Sun. It was Sun's son. And apparently Sun had died down in California somewhere. He had his last few years on Earth were very sad and traumatic, but he'd done good by us when we were on the ground. And so he's one of our 15-year-olds.
Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So back to your Christmas. Didn't mean to interrupt you. I always thought that just the fact that these guys were so young is just an incredible feat, for anybody.
Well, yeah, and again, like when we had talked over breakfast, the questions often raised, what did these young guys think? I mean, why would they be willing to put their life on the line, particularly in a top secret operation? Well, first of all, they're getting paid more than with a regular Vietnamese army, and B, they're working with special forces, and they knew that our training levels were higher. So the question was, and we talked about this a few times, the young guys on the team, everybody, all my South Vietnamese, including 3 of whom came from North Vietnam with their families when they were very young. Because after Dien Bien Phu fell, that was the last major battle with the French in the Indochina War. When they fell, they had an opportunity, and 3 families came south. And it was Phuc, Tuan, and I believe Sun was the 3rd family that came from North Vietnam. And they were just really outstanding soldiers. And they all said, we knew our government's corrupt in South Vietnam, but we could live with a corrupt government. We prefer that, and we're willing to die for it before we would live under the thumb of communism. And that just encapsulates why we're there and why to this day I'm proud of what we did in that effort. Absolutely. And so Christmas rolled around. In fact, I don't think I remember it was Christmas Day, because we had a very active pace at that time for missions. And we had the DMZ one. There was another one where we got shot out. We were on the ground for a short period of time, got out. So on Christmas Day, we had a mission, briefed for it, and Spider Parks was flying Cubby. He found an LZ, and they had been increasing the anti-aircraft and artillery and things that they were beginning to use against our helicopters. So for that day, the Vietnamese, normally the King Bee would come in, they call it the falling yellow leaf, where they would spiral down to the LZ. Last minute they'd flare, land, we'd jump out, hit the jungle, they'd take off. On this day, we didn't do that. They came in right at treetop level. We followed the DMZ River into Laos, and then we turned and went up, began to climb up a mountain ridge. And the plan was to get inserted on the top of the mountain. But for some reason, the King Bee set us down there, and we could just see out the door. So I thought we were near the top. He set us down in elephant grass, but we're out the door. He left, and we had like a little finger. We were on this small knoll, and the south side and the west side were just really steep. And so we tried to go east, and we're in elephant grass. It's just very noisy. So we came out of it, and we went a short distance. We made contact. Fook was running point that day. Made contact. We came back, set back up, and we're debating what to do. And to the northeast, there's one more path we could have gone, but everything else was just too steep, and it was quiet. And there were a couple NVA that came back. They fired at us a few times, and we threw some hand grenades at them. And some of the hand grenades ignited the elephant grass down the hill. And so when the NVA saw the fire was coming up the hill, they went around and began to light other elephant grass because the draft of the wind in the valley was coming up the hill, pushing the flames up the hill at us. And Lynn and I were standing there talking for a minute saying, the northeast, we could go there, but it's quiet. And Lynn's like, he's like going, I don't trust this. And then Spider calls and said, hey, we just had an intel report. Do not go to the northeast because there's an NVA ambush there for RT Idaho. And like, what? I said, repeat last transmission. And Spider said it again. So that's, in my mind, and with Lynn, I told Lynn right away. I said, well, hey, man, we can't go up there. So now I said, get those king bees in here because we're on top. It's too steep to go down. And the flames kept up, coming up the hill. Lynn and Bubba Shore, the other team member, put out C4 in an attempt to blow the flames back down the hill. And during that time, the flames were so close that we all had dust. Bubba and Lynn had singed hair, singed arm hair. I think Lynn may have even had some like first degree burns on his arm from being so close because that flames kept coming. And at some point, Captain Tuong, who inserted us, came back with the king bee. And he came down, he came in above us this time. And he came down sideways, flying sideways, so I could see him in the pilot seat. When I saw him, I go, well, at least we got a chance now. He came in, the prop wash held back the flames. The team gets on, under enemy fire. I'm the last guy in. We take off, and whoosh, all those flames just came up and just overtook where we had been seconds earlier.
Talk about timing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's Christmas Day. So we go back to base that night, took a shower and stuff. And after my shower, I was walking back. I really don't remember. But if I had remembered it was Christmas or not. But there was some little tinny transistor radio playing. And it said Silent Night on it. And I just stopped dead in my tracks, walking back to the hooch. I go, damn, it's Christmas. And I think about Mom and Dad, my Uncle Rob, and Granddad and Grandmom Stryker. They always come on for Christmas Day for the big day, at my mom's house. And I thought about that for a minute. And then after everything we'd been through, I said to myself, I wonder if I'm going to make it to my birthday. Because today was really close. We had the Thanksgiving Day mission, the October 4th mission, and a couple other missions in between, which we talked about earlier. And my birthday's January the 19th. Me, Robert E. Lee, and Dolly Parton. We all had the January 9th birthday. And so I said, I don't know if I'll make it or not, but we got to do the best we can. Got dressed, went to the clubhouse. So that was Christmas. And then we had a few days off. And then there was on New Year's Eve, a recon team got inserted into one of our MA targets. As you look at South Vietnam, you had the DMZ, and on the Laotian border where the DMZ ended, it was the DMZ, we called it the DMZ River. I forget what it was in Vietnam. But the river goes further west into Laos, and they had targets on north-south of it. And we had a team that went into one of those targets. And on New Year's Eve, they got inserted on the day. They were in that target. And first light in the morning, Spider Parks was on the radio doing a comm check with them when they got hit. All 3 Americans were killed right away. The indigenous escaped and evaded. And one of the indigenous troops a couple of days later, when he got back to Vietnam, was killed by a Marine because the Marine didn't realize that he was one of our people. But that's one of those stories that just stick with you. And so in January, we got involved with closing down FOB1, which was Phu-Bai. And at that point, there had been 6 FOBs, and MACV SOG headquarters consolidated. So we closed FOB1, FOB3, which was then Mylock. Earlier, FOB3 had been at the Marine Corps base at Quezon, and we had an operational base right next to the Marines there. And so we still ran missions, top secret missions into Laos. Those were closed, and then FOB6 was closed, and FOB5 became CCS South, Kontum became CCC Central, and Da Nang, FOB4, became CCN North. And our team went there. John Walt and a couple other teams went down to Kontum, and Lynn and I went there. And then, in fact, Lynn may have even taken Alabama for a while. But then Lynn came back, and that's where we began running missions out of there, with CCN.
So up until this point, did you have any gauge on how effective the recon missions were? Like, did it seem like they were trying to ramp up how often you guys were going, or was it the opposite?
No, I mean, there's always an effort to have a team on the ground because of the reason why we had the secret war. We didn't know what was going on in Laos and Cambodia, and that's why we had the secret war in the first place. And so, as we stated before, the missions could be anything from area recon, point recon, wiretap. The NVA would begin to run down fuel lines, to find the fuel lines, blow them up, destroy as much of the fuel line, and waste as much fuel as possible to hamper them moving south. And in Kontum, they would do a slam operation where they'd go in, block the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then the trucks and everything would get backed up, and the Air Force would come in and just hammer them. And then but after 3 or 4 of those missions, they began, the NVA would react quicker, and they would really pound the hatchet force that was doing the trail block. And so by 1970, we had Operation Tailwind, which was run out of Kontum. Captain Gene McCarley, they had 16 Green Berets with 120 indigenous troops, and they went deep west beyond the normal area of operations for prairie fire because the CIA had a major battle going on further west of our AO, because they had a secret war the CIA was involved in, and we had ours that focused on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And for that mission, they were on the ground for 4 days. They destroyed 2 enemy caches. It was probably one of the most successful major efforts like that. And the medic on that team, Gary Mike Rose, received the Medal of Honor from President Trump on October 23rd, 2017. Took a while, but he got it. And there were also 32 Purple Hearts that were handed out to the 16 Green Berets. They only had a couple of KIAs, but there's over 50 to 60% of the men on that mission were wounded, including Mike Rose, who was wounded on the first night. He had a serious hand injury, another shrapnel cut into his boot, and his foot was bleeding. He just wrapped it around with an ace bandage and used his Car 15 as a crutch and kept everybody else alive for those 4 days on the ground. So that was a major successful mission. And in our case, for me personally, I was on a team. We had planned for a couple of major missions that were different. And one was to go up to Mugia Pass. And we had planned for it, studied it, and then we were on the helicopters, literally flying up to hit the target when we got recalled because another aircraft had been shot down, literally on the target site where we were going in. So, and that was right near the end of my tour of duty. So from there, I went home, went to Fort Devens. I was there for 5 months, hated every second of Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I got assigned to Signal Company, whereas people like Spider Parks, Tony Harrell, Pat Watkins, they all went to D Company. at the 10th Special Forces Group. So I was like, that was an operational company. They had A teams that were doing training. They were going to Germany, all kinds of good stuff. And I'm stuck in Signal Company. Hated every second of it. Hated it so much that I went down to the Pentagon. There's a little lady, and her name was Billy Alexander. I drove down all night, got to the Pentagon in the morning, had to take her a bottle, whatever her bottle of wine was, and flowers. Gave it to her, and I went back to the parking lot, slept. This is back in the days when the Pentagon, you could just walk in. Not like today where they got 10,000 security people there and metal detectors and dogs and everything else, which is crazy. But I went in, saw Billy, got my orders, came back to base, cleared, and a couple of days later I was in Seattle, and Jeffrey Junkins was there. And Jeff and I had served together at FOB1. And it's like, oh my God, you're going back to Nam. So we got together, had a couple of drinks. He was just like a live wire for the entire flight to Vietnam. We got to Vietnam, we landed, and it was much different because the first time we were there, none of us knew what we were doing. But this time we landed, and there were always people from other units that always tried to get special forces into their units. And so Jeff and I said, we're not having any of this. So as soon as we got our rucksack and our baggage, we picked them up. We looked for a Jeep that wasn't occupied, jumped in and took off. And we drove up to the Trang. We didn't go to base. Jeff had a house with some women in it that one of their jobs was to process marijuana. And we went in there. There's this big room. There's 4 beds. Each bed had 3 or 4 mamasans. They were just sitting there rolling joints with stacks of marijuana. I'm going like, wait a minute. But these were just friends. And we hung out there, had a few drinks, and then finally reported for duty. Went back to CCN. The sergeant major was John Hobbs, just a real gentleman, a great sergeant major. He got me back on Idaho. And so that's October of 69.
So 2 questions that kind of, I guess, linked together a little bit, but one was, we talked about you having your first Christmas and New Year's there. How did it affect you not being able to talk about any of what was happening there, right? Because you have a gag order on everything that you're doing.
Right, we had the NDAs.
So it's basically, if you talk to anybody from home in letters or anything else, I mean, you can't really talk about anything that's going on. So does that take a toll over time, just not being able to tell anybody?
No, for me personally, it was just like, hey, this is why I'm in Special Forces. You know, we're the tip of the spear here. Whatever your rules, regulations are, I'm with the program. Yeah. In fact, thanks to some people that didn't listen to those rules, they took pictures. I didn't begin taking pictures until much later, and I only had minimal photographs. And the majority of ones I have to this day, I stole or take from somebody else. You know, over time. My second tour, I took a few more pictures. But, so no, that's just the rules of engagement. This is the way we are, we're cool. And I went home from my first tour, even my second tour. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to talk about Vietnam, least of all. And so like in my family, we were there, hey, what'd you do? Well, I was a Green Beret. We were busy there working with the local people and stuff. Pass the string beans. And that would be it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That was my other question, is how it was coming home.
Sure. And then we had... I had really good friends from my church group. And so my buddy, we had a church softball team. So I got home in May of 70. I out-processed in April 25th, 1970. And when I got home, we just went back to work, went back to school. And no questions, nothing much. It just, what's next? Let's get on with life here. It took me 2 years to flunk out. So I wanted to go back and make up some courses. So that summer, did that. And my buddies, we had the softball team. And of course, after the game, we'd go get a beer or two. It's just great being with the guys. Then we had a church bowling team with the young guys. We had the old guys team that was really good, and the young guys, And so it was really fun. So all that kind of helped, to reacclimate. And my family was always there. Mom and Dad were there, supportive, and I lived with them through going back to school for 4 years. They put up with me, my antics, you know. But God bless him, and thank you again. So yeah, and then graduated from college. I've been got involved with the school newspaper there for a couple of years. Graduated with a degree in political science, minor in English, and got a job at the local newspaper, Trenton Times, in January 1975.
Wow. So this was like a common thing, not just for you, but anybody that came back from Vietnam. It seemed like nobody wanted to talk about what was going on over there.
Well, yeah, the Special Forces couldn't.
Right.
And by that time, the anti-war stuff, I mean, there was just open hostilities to veterans coming into airports. I mean, there are some of the guys that we've interviewed for SOGCast, at least one has said that when they came back, they were told, get out of your uniform and get in civilian clothes. Don't even walk through the airport. Because, you know, particularly like San Fran, Oakland, up there with all those liberals that were, again, there was infiltrated by communist agents that were pushing the anti-war movement, supporting it, and anything to help divide our country, which the communists have been doing very well, as evidenced even by today.
Yeah,
2024.
that is unreal.
Yes, sir.
So you got back to Vietnam
Yes, sir.
and had your party.
Well, we got back, and that was the good part. I mean, when I landed at the CCN, I talked to Sergeant Major Hobbs. He said, yeah, you're on. Because the Frenchman had just left, Doug Letourneau. And he and Lynn ran some incredible missions together. And so I walked down to the hooch, and nobody was there. So I put the duffel bag down, went over to the range. As I'm walking to the range, the guys were coming off the range. And they're like, oh no, mucky eye, mean dirty mouth, or do mammy mother bleeper. And so we had all these mutual insults, you know. It's like, they're back. And so Lynn goes, what's going on? I said, well, you're the team leader. You knew 1-1. I said, you've been here for 5 months. You know what's going on. And you're the 1-1. I mean, you're the 1-0, and I'm reporting for duty, so let me know what you need. And we had a great night. We went down with the team. We ate some chow at the Indigenous Mess Hall with them. And it was just really one of the coolest moments of all, just to be welcomed back by the little people, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're going to do AO now, right?
No, everything, well, it was a base of operations with CCN and Da Nang.
Yeah.
And that was FOB 4 that was hit on August 23rd, 68, where 16 Green Berets were killed in a sapper attack that had been planned by the enemy for over a year. So security was a bigger concern when I got there. And so we had people, you pulled guard duty like you did everywhere. But the missions were still the same. Laos, DMZ, occasionally go for a down pilot. And of course the fuel lines became a major target. And Lynn and I ran a couple of quick missions, both of which we got shot out of pretty quick. And by the time Christmas rolled around, Lynn and I had worked on another mission to try to get a POW. We trained up for it really heavy, and during the training, Chow didn't throw the hand grenade far enough, and I got hit with shrapnel in my groin, and I bled like a pig. So I had to stop the bleeding, and the medics were doing something, but they were understaffed. And so the medics took me down to one of the field evacuation hospitals. And so I go in as one of those moments where they cut your pants and stuff off. What's going on? I had one major wound. That's where the bleeding was coming from. Of course, I had stopped by that time. And this big doctor comes out with a big beard. And he comes out and says, yeah, some shrapnel, huh? He gets his sutures out, you know, the scissors that have a bend to them. He goes out and he starts digging in there. And I'm like, whoa. I said, you're going to give me a little some painkiller here or some kind of another shot? Oh, you didn't get your shot yet? And he'd been digging around, there's blood on the end of those sutures. He's trying to find the shrapnel. Well, he couldn't find it. So he did give me the shots. He came back and tried again. They took an x-ray. They couldn't find it. So they bandaged me up. And the second he left, I mean, the second that door closed, I could see fatigues over on a hook. I went over, tried the jacket on, it fit. Pulled up the pants, they fit. And I had a pair of jungle boots, even though they're a little bloody. Jumped back into my jungle boots, walked off that base, away from that hospital. I found a phone. I called CCN and said, hey, give me a ride. Get me the hell out of here. These people are crazy. I'd rather be dealing with a Green Beret medic than this doctor here at the med center. Went back, talked to the medics. They cleaned me up a little further. Went back to training with Lynn for the mission, which got canceled after all that training, of course. And so by that time, then Lynn left for special missions that, again, he'll be talking about more a little bit later. And then I took over the team. And we ran a couple of missions, got rained out a few times. And then in February of 1970, we had, which for me in Idaho was another one of those historic moments where the weather was bad in South Vietnam. So we flew to Thailand, and we had a base there as a 46th Special Forces Group, which was an NKP, non-com phenom. So we flew over in an airplane, and because we weren't allowed to have combat troops in Thailand, the Air Force picked us up in one of the blue Air Force trucks with curtains. And so we all jump out and get into the truck, go over to the 46th headquarters there. They back it up to the door. They open the door. We all run inside because nobody could see the South, particularly the South Vietnamese carrying weapons in Thailand. Just all that political bullshit that was going on. So we did all that. And then we got rained out one day for the mission. But the CO for that operation was Major Bill Shelton, a good friend. He had been the XO. He closed Fubai, got promoted to a job there. And we briefed for the target. And they had bridges that along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, there's always times when the trail would go across a water area. And they would begin to see traffic go across the water. And the water was significantly deep that a truck ordinarily wouldn't be able to do it. So the question was, what are these bridges like? So go find a bridge, dynamite it, and then preferably blow it up when there's a truck on it. And so that was the mission. The idea was to go into a mountaintop, surveil the area for a day or two, because we knew the bridge we wanted, and then move down to it once we got used to the traffic flow and everything. And we told that to the Air Force, and then this is, to give you an idea how long the flight was, they would go up to 4,000 or 5,000 feet. We all put blankets on, flew, and they flew for a long period of time. And here we are, we're flying, they land at a refuel base in the middle of Laos on this mountaintop. And this guy comes out, he's a gringo. He comes out, pulls up next to the helicopter, he's pumping the aviation fuel into the helicopter. I'm standing there like, hey man, what's going on? Where are we? He says, no, we're not here. Oh, really? Oh, good. I'm not here either. Nor is this helicopter. So give me a refill. Fill it up, would you? Then we launched. Now, this Air Force pilot didn't get the memo, I guess, about putting us on a mountaintop. And it was a long flight. So we lifted off, and we'd been up late that night before, so we take a nap. And the last second, I could feel the helicopter going down, but I wasn't sure where we were. I'm like half in and half out. But John was keeping an eye on it. John goes, hey, wake up. They're going to insert us any minute. And we look out, and they weren't on a mountaintop. They were going through this valley. And as I woke up, I look out the door, and here's a guy behind his ox with a plow. And his wife or some woman's with him. And we hop over a couple more hedgerows, and he landed in the middle of this field in the valley. Well, I'm pissed, but I just hate being on the ground waiting. So we all jumped out of the helicopter, put our gear on, and then I split the team. John took one side, I took the other. We went along these hedgerows, and I didn't stop. Normally we would go 10 and 10, but we didn't hear any enemy activity. We couldn't see the farmer and his wife or whoever she was, and we moved away from them. Went over several hedgerows, came down further into a valley, and then there were these huge mountains, and each mountain had these fingers of growth that came down really deep. So we went around like 2 or 3 of these, and it's getting dark now. And we could begin to hear some truck activity from back where we had been. And so we came to the 3rd or 4th finger. We went around it, went up the hill, and then Sal took us in. And it was thick briars. So we had an 8-man teams, myself, John Engels, with 6 of our little people. And, we went in, and Sal kept saying, no, go more, go more. I'm like, look at my shirt. I was torn. I had torn my pants. Anyway, Sal was right. We went in there. That night, they came with dogs, and they were looking for us, and trucks came from the other way. They unloaded their troops, and they just missed us. They came past our finger and began searching the other fingers. And some of the fingers, they were going up into them and shooting into them at night. We had 1 or 2 NVA that came up to our finger, and one guy came around right to where we entered, the thicket. By now, we're all sitting there on full automatic. He came in a little bit and stopped, and Sal was right. Had Sal not pushed us further into the thicket, this guy would have found us. But because we were in the thicket, he turned around and went back. They were looking for us with dogs, and we had put down some powdered mace and black pepper, assuming the dogs would be coming. And we made it through the night. In the day, in the early morning, they had a couple of trucks that went down this road. And we turned around. Here's this mountain. So we climbed up the finger, and then we came to a mountain that was literally straight up. And we had to climb up that for the entire day to get away from them. Because they didn't know exactly where we were, and we gave them no indications of where we were, had minimal commo, so they couldn't do any RDF on us. But that climb was rough. And we had no ropes, no climbing materials or apparatus, and we needed rope. So what we had to do was our Swiss seats, that were a 12-foot piece of rope, we tied together 3 or 4. So you climb up to a ledge, take your rucksack up, put it back on, climb a little further, and everybody had to do this until we got to the top that night, right at last light. We got to the top, put up an RON, put out the claymores, and then in the morning, we waited for a little bit for a combo check. It was a nice clear day. And we moved a short distance, and we came across this wild field of orchids, just like as far as the eye could see. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And when I was in Trenton, for a few years, I worked at John Elanowski florist shop. And I used to go around delivering flowers for these guys. But I could tell these orchids, had we been in Trenton, John Elanowski would have been really happy to get those orchids, man. And so we had a giddy moment. Everybody except Sal cut off an orchid. They had it in their hair, and they're laughing and playing around quietly, of course. And then, then we got back to business. And so we went down the mountain slope, but we didn't get on the skyline, on the ridgeline itself. We were south of it, or on the other side, but we descended. And then we moved, 10 and 10, like we normally would. And then we finally came to like a little plateau. And I went out on the plateau, took a break, had a commo break, and then we formed up. We found another finger that went further down that would go towards that bridge that we wanted to get to. And so Chow, who was one of the 3 15-year-olds we hired, Chow with John Engels, started down the mountain. And they only got maybe a short distance, and they opened fire. And they had NVA were coming up. There was a small element, I'm not sure, 2 or 3 guys, maybe 4 at the most. Anyway, Chow killed them all. But we came back, got a hold of Covey, and then there was some more enemy activity in the valley. And we thought we heard some enemy activity up on the mountain, where the night before we had our RON. And there was a trail from that mountaintop that came down, and we had paralleled the ridgeline. We didn't get on the ridgeline itself, but we stayed in the jungle coming down. And so we were on that ridgeline, began directing some TAC air on some enemy movement in the valley. And at one point, the team was over on the plateau, and I came out to this end because the A-1 Sky Raiders were taking some enemy fire. So I directed ordnance on the enemy fire, and the last one was like a 51 caliber. The NVA was shooting at the A1s, and he couldn't tell where the gun sight was coming from. So I said, I'm going to put a magazine of tracers in. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll point you right to it. He says, ready. So I fired. I says, I got it. And we're on this mountaintop. Here comes this A1. Came in like straight down with a napalm run. Beautiful. He dropped the napalm and pulled out and took that weapon out. Had secondary explosions and everything. But when I did it, I'm on the edge of that little plateau. And across 300 or 400 yards away, maybe 500 at the most, there's a tree. And I can see this NVA in the tree, and somebody handed him an RPG, just the launcher. And I could see him. And he's looking for us. And he's looking around at that plateau. And then Sun got up, the same Sun we talked about earlier. He got up to do something. I forget what it was, but the NVA saw him. He reached down. He got the explosive device. He put it in. Now he's looking. And I'm sitting there going, like, that's when I did like my Car 15. I pulled out the stock, and it just felt so unusual because most of our firefights, everything was close like this. Never anything. But I pulled it out, and I aimed at this guy. He's right in my sights. As I'm aiming at him, I heard my third grade Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Myrtle Reichert, say, "Thou shalt not kill." I said, "Sorry, Myrtle. This guy's out to kill my team." And then he came up and he aimed. When he aimed the RPG, one round, took him out of the tree. And so at that point, we had declared a prairie fire emergency. They were rallying TAC Air for us. We were seeing more enemy activity.
For those that don't know, you want to talk about what a prairie fire emergency is?
When we were in Laos or North Vietnam, whenever a recon team made enemy contact, or we're in contact with the enemy, then we declared a prairie fire emergency, which would direct all TAC Air to our station to support us when we were on the ground. And so I had declared that prairie fire, and they launched the helicopters. But again, it's that 3+ hour wait until they get there. So right about last light, we could hear the helicopters coming, HH-3s from Thailand. Well, bottom line was, they turned around and went home. The Covey pilot said one of the helicopters developed some kind of problem. They had to go back to base. So now we're saying, we're going to be here for the night. And so I told everybody, except for John and one of the indigs stayed awake. I said, everybody else, take a nap, because it's going to be a long night. And when it got dark, we moved out to the center area of that plateau and set up an RON, put the claymores out, and I took a nap. And a few hours later, John Engels wakes me up and says, "Tilt, you won't believe this shit." And it was about maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock, maybe a little later. And coming down that mountain range, ridgeline that we'd walked parallel to, were dozens of lanterns. And in between each lantern, there was troops coming down. And then he pointed out the trail where he had had the firefight earlier in the day, and there are people coming up the trail. And then in the valley, there were trucks literally coming up to a trail to let men off to come up the hill to get us from the valley. Then there was another valley on the other side. We could hear the trucks there. And then across that valley, we could see plateau. And there are NVA trucks coming up there, and all loading troops were going downhill, getting and coming across, all directed to us. And so at that point, Covey says, Specter's going to be here. You'll link in with him and talk directly to the aircraft commander. Roger that. So I'm not sure what time, but the first Specter arrives with all these guys coming down the mountain, coming up at us. And our pucker factor is -0 right about then. So I put the strobe light in my sawed-off M79, aimed it at the Spectre, and that's what normally that would be good. He could lock into it, and then we could do tack air, direct his fire anywhere he wanted it. And I turned the strobe light on, it's blinking away. He goes, "I can't find your light." He said, "There's so many lights down there, I can't see you." I said, "I just turned my light off, and I forget which side of the mountain. But I said, I'm putting my team on this side of the mountain," and we were able to direct that off of the valley. So let's just say if we're here, I put our team on the plateau, this edge, on the valley side. And he was able to tell from the valley this long line of troops because of the lights and the one coming up. I said, "Get them and get any of the lights. I just turned mine off. Get the rest." And he tore them up. He just marched that ordnance up that trail, down the other trail. He asked how it was going. I said, "It looks great to me. Do it again." He did it again. And then he began hitting the targets in the valley. So now all the lanterns go off, all the truck lights, the valley and the plateau, they're all getting turned off. Spectre has arrived. And Spectre at that time had, I believe, 4 miniguns and 2 20 Mike cannons, or 2 miniguns and 2 20 Mike cannons. And they could bring that right down to within 25 meters of us. And they kicked ass and took nevers. We'll never know how many people they killed that night, but they did some damage. We expended him. He left. Another Spectre arrived. Again, we did some more direct enemy fire on the ridge line up top. They were able to identify where more of the enemy troops were coming from. Directed all those firefights with them. And we went through a third one. The third one was a little late getting there. And in between, we could hear NVA coming up. We could hear them kind of crawling towards us, but they didn't know exactly where we were.
So up till now, you hadn't been actively engaged with them?
Nothing.
On the ground?
It was just me talking to Spectre. And then during this quiet time, Sal could come up and say, "VC," give me the sign that VC is crawling up. And he said he could hear him. Chow could hear him. Now, my hearing's not as good as theirs, even back then. And so we started throwing hand grenades. And then they would scurry away. And then you'd hear him dragging a body. Third Spectre came in, and we directed some more fire power from them. At one point, we even had to throw some flares out just so we could see what was going on in the valley. We identified some more targets and went through it. The weather closed in, and we were socked in for a while. And the 4 Spectres said, "Well, I can't see you right now, but we'll stay on station away. If the weather breaks, we'll come back." Well, we were down there, I forget for how long, hour and a half. And now we're playing that game of guess whether I'm throwing a hand grenade or not. Sal and Chow crawled out and got rocks. Somehow they went out and got like a bunch of rocks. So when they could hear the NVA crawling up towards us, we throw a rock and they think it's a hand grenade. You hear them scurry away like rats. So they come back again, throw another rock, but they wouldn't scurry quite as far away. So then we went ahead and threw a hand grenade. And we're playing this little game for a while, on and off in the night. Well, it got to the point where we're getting low on hand grenades. We even threw a white phosphorus one just to change it. And that kind of directed people. They knew where we were, but I figured after going through this all night, by now it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, that we're going to get real air cover. And I wanted to inflict as much damage as we could. And Sal goes, "Buku NVA." And he said he could hear him. He gave me the sign that they're close. So the 4th Spectre came back. And he goes, I locked him in, this time with the strobe light. And I said, I want it within, I forget, 10, 15 meters. He says, I can't. Said no more, anything under 25 meters. I said, this guy's arguing with me. I'm here, these NVA are crawling at us. He says, any casualties that I inflict, you have to accept responsibility for it. So anything under, if they shoot under 25 meters, bring the ordnance. And now, when we got in that grass, the grass was like 3-4 feet tall. In the morning when we left, it had been mowed. But there's so many rounds were coming in with those angles. So anyways, I got accept full responsibility for any casualties you inflict. Now get these motherfuckers. And he opened fire, brought it in close, really close. And he marched it back. He brought it in right around my strobe light, circled us, and then circled us back around, and then pushed them down the hill. And again, we'll never know how many people they killed. So we went through that, we spent it, put some more flares out, and by morning light, we had SPADs came in, we directed some SPADs, some more gunships, and then the helicopter HH-3s came, and they picked us up, and I told them to come close to us. Well, of course, Air Force do things their way. They were further away. So we had to go from our little ridge line down the hill to get to the helicopter. So I had angles go down first so they wouldn't mistake our little people for NVA. And when we went down, there's no bodies. But there's blood trails. You could see where people had been dragging their dead away. We could hear it during the night. But we'll never know how many people they killed. So we lifted off, and we took stream gunfire from the wood line, from the down in the valley. They opened up again, and they directed attack air. We got back and went to NKP, flew over. We got back to CCM. We come into base, and all the guys were on the airstrip. Hey, man, welcome back. You guys had a rough night. Well, yeah, we were really lucky. We had Spectre. We went through 4 of them. And one of the guys goes, what are you doing with all the magazines for? And I said, hey, man, we used TAC air last night. We weren't in a firefight. We used all my hand grenades are gone. I don't have my Willie Peter anymore. So that was like right around February 8th, 1970.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story.
Oh yeah, Spectre. And this is 1970. But that kind of ordnance control, and to bring it that close without inflicting. Now, we got hit with gravel and stuff that they kicked up, but thank you. Covered me with gravel anytime we're killing those dogs, those commies.
How high were these, were the Spectres?
I'm not sure.
Could you see him visit? Like you could see?
No, you couldn't see them.
Oh, wow.
They were darked out. Only thing you saw would be, sometimes they have tracer rounds in between the rounds. So it'd be 4 and 1. So every tracer, there'd be 4 ball, tracer, 4 ball.
That's something else.
Oh, it's incredible. Just unbelievable. And then we never, and again, this is like, they came out that night and saved their ass. We never talked to them. We never knew who they were. And we just had a reunion where we met somebody who actually was inspector, but he didn't know if it was that mission or not, because that's the first thing. You flew Spectres? When? Where? Where were you February 1970, you know? You may have saved my team's bacon that night.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And just to think, like, to picture how dark it was for you to not be able to see, you know, any of these guys or how close they were, or it's just the unknown. It's just something else there.
It was. And the fact that they never fired around at us, they really didn't know where we were. And the white phosphorus was the first true marker. But they had to kill so many of them. But Spectre, you just can't imagine. Absolutely. So we cleaned up. We had a couple of days off. And again, it was bad weather. So we ran another mission. We were on the ground only a day or so. We're compromised, came back. And then we had a major issue with our commanding officer, a guy named Lieutenant Colonel James Donahue. And he was a friend of Creighton Abrams, who was the supreme Allied commander for Vietnam. And he was sent up there as a CO for CCN without any knowledge about Special Forces or SOG. But he knew there was a lot of contact, and he was there to get as many medals for himself as possible. So during his tenure there, myself and a couple other recon guys kept asking for a better radio because we had been compromised. We knew we were compromised. We knew that they had the radio frequencies in the field, and we suspected that there was a spy, all of which was confirmed later. There was a spy in SOG headquarters. When the Pueblo was captured by the North Koreans in early '68, they did it at the behest of the Russians. And the Pueblo was a state-of-the-art intelligence ship. It came in to port in North Korea. The Russians were there and took out the encryption materials. Some of it, we believe, went to Cambodia. At the same time, the John Walker spy ring was in Washington, D.C., getting the CAC codes, the daily codes that were used. And they also had some radio devices that he had gotten, they sold to the Russians, that the Russians used, that they were able to eavesdrop on our radio teletype, top secret commo. So those are some of the other things we're up against. Anyways, we're asking the CO for better radios. And we never got them. Then they came up with the idea, we carried a FM radio, it's called the PRC-25. They came up with a 77, which looked like the PRC-25, but it had an extension to it where you put a coaxial cable on it and attached to a KY-38, which was the first vocal encryption system. And you had this it looked like about the same size as a PRC-25 or a 77, except that it was the voice scrambler, and it had a metal punch, but it was like about this thick with a big handle on it, about this long. At the very bottom, you put in the code that you're using for that day. Then you got it in the KY-38, punched it in, and that would set your secure voice for the day. Now, I told the CO, one mission we had taken, it didn't work, but the firefight wasn't severe enough that I destroyed it. And on this mission, I had a mission where they wanted an area recon as part of the Ashall Valley. We didn't have anybody in this target area for a while. My thought was, we'll go in with a 4-man team, hit the ground, and just literally, because the vegetation wasn't triple canopy, it would be 1.5. Sometimes there's bomb damage. We could get around, but really move quickly, because whenever we moved in an unorthodox way, the NVA had a hard time responding to it. I figured 4-man team, hit the ground, and move west, due west, get intel reports. But the CO goes, no, you got to carry the KY-38. I'm going, so I carry this. I got a 4-man team, and I got another guy's going to carry that. John Engels, the 1-1's going to carry that. The little people are going to have to carry that metal punch, the coaxial cable. And I said, if I make contact, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to have a thermite grenade that I will destroy that. Okay, but take it. Fine. So that's a direct order. So we get inserted. It's a perfect insertion. I'm on the ground. We're moving. And we hear enemy activity. And Cubby came by for a commo check. Go through the rigmarole. Hook up the coaxial cable. We had punched in the code earlier. Can you hear me now? No. No commo. I go on the ERC-10 and say, hey, this thing's not working. Okay. But we made commo. I said, look, I'm afraid that we're going to be making enemy contact here soon, but we're going to continue to move. So this time we moved cautiously. We heard some more enemy activity coming towards us from the north. And we stopped like just a little knoll area, made a commo check, and then Sun, who was with us. Now, it was Sun, I think it was Sun and Hung, who came with John Engels and I. And we're doing this, waiting. We can't move. We can hear the enemy coming. And we thought I heard some enemy from the west. So I called for TAC air. And I told Cubby, I said, this isn't working. And I've got that damn KY-38. It's not working. So I said, I want a tactical emergency. Means that you're not in contact. You will be soon. Pull us out. We've been compromised. Meaning the radio. And he goes, no. When I'm talking to Cubby, because Cubby would be usually an O2 Cessna, push pull aircraft, and then, or by that time we were beginning to see some OV-10s. But I forget what he was flying, but he said, oh, I could hear a helicopter back east, hovering, like east of the Ashwell Valley. And we're in the west side of the Ashwell Valley, which was the worst target area. In 1966, we had 3 A camps that were in the Ashwell Valley. All got wiped out by the NBA. And it was one of our worst targets. So this is going on in the back of my mind. And he says, the commanding officer denied your request. Break contact, continue mission. Words that we dread and hate. Okay. So we moved a little bit longer, set up another listening post. Again, we could hear more troops. This time we had some live fire, but not a lot. It was just John and I had gotten separated. He was with some, but we still had eye-to-eye contact. He saw somebody with an AK or something, they fired, and we stopped. So now it's like, okay, I tried the KY-30. I said, this thing's not working. I go to my ERC-10, which is the emergency frequency radio, and it's not working. I'm blowing it up. Get the thermite out, put it on that KY-30. It starts melting down. There's smoke, there's fire, there's all kinds of shit going on. And while this is smoldering away, I'm standing in the jungle, and I look north because that's where we heard. And I heard a couple of people walk past. And I wasn't quite sure where they're going. And then there's this grassy, like a jungle grass and plants and whatever. As I'm looking, now I'm just standing here with my car 15 like this, pointing right at when I'm listening. I see a face, a young NVA face coming slowly through the grass towards me. He finally sees my eyes. He sees my car 15. And his AK's like this. So we just stood there for a minute. And he decided to back up. He backed up, went back a little further. I just moved a little bit, just in case he decided to change his mind. And he moved out. We never heard a peep from him. So by this time, I'm declaring a prairie fire emergency. Cubby was reluctant, but then we got a new Cubby rider who came in, and he said, fuck them. If you want out, we'll pull you. But we have to pull you on strings. So we directed some TAC air. At one point, one of the A1 Skyraiders made a gun run. And when he came in, he just tilted his aircraft like this. When he went by, he was so close, I could hear the metal like moving in the aircraft as he changed aviation directions. And he was so close, I could tell he was smoking a Philly cheroot cigar. And he saluted him back. He went his merry way. They pulled us out on strings. We got back to base. We landed at the helicopter pad. And this POS Sergeant Major comes and says, the CO wants to see you right now. Yes, sir. Go down to the CO, walk in. And so where's my KY-38? I said, well, sir, like I said, it didn't work. I destroyed it in the Ashwell Valley. That you violated my order. I said not to destroy it. So we had words. And so basically, he said, I want you out of camp. First thing in the morning, you're done here. I will ruin your Special Forces career. Okay. So we had a few more words. And then At that point, I said, sir, you're really a disgrace to the West Point. Said a few words, and then he said something to me, and I said, fuck you, sir. I turned around and left, didn't even salute. The sergeant major comes up to me, and this guy's just a POS to the max. We all hated him. He said, you didn't salute him. I said, you're a piece of shit too, and fuck you, sir. Walked out, and I stopped by the A&D office, awards and decorations. I said, by the way, has the CEO put himself in for some awards and decorations offer this morning? He goes, yeah, he told me he's going to be doing paperwork on it. So he put himself in for an award for being 4 or 5 clicks away from us, hearing us ask for TAC air and denying the request. So that night, I went back to the hooch. Right after that, I'm done. Told John Engels the bad news. Told the sergeant, the good sergeant major, the bad news. Went down to the team. I said, told Hep and Sal, here's $500. Get all the food and the booze, whatever you want for tonight. If you need more money, you come back. I'll give you the money. They went downtown, came back. We had our last big team party. They cooked up all this food and other booze and stuff. And I may have drunk a little bit that night. Not a lot, but anyways, we had our last team party. And so this is around early April, because I got out April 25. So around about maybe April 10th, 11th, right around there, 1970. Had the party. Deep into the night, one by one, all the guys passed out. Hep was the last guy, my interpreter. Hep was standing there. Finally goes, you want anything else? Meaning, do I need him to be an interpreter? I said, no, Hep. He literally passed out in the sand, right there. So I reached down, pick him up, dust him off, because, it's like, for me, it's like, this is Hep. And he'd been such a part of Idaho for so long. Even though he got a promotion to headquarters, he's still my Hep, my buddy, forever. So take him, put him in bed, cover him up. A couple of the other guys, I look around, I'm standing in the door going, I'm leaving tomorrow and these guys are staying. And what does the world hold, in the future for them? I felt it was just one of those horrible moments in time. So first light, I left, went down to the Trang, reported to the sergeant major there, and he says, whatever you want, I'll give you the assignment. He says, but you're going to get out in 2 weeks. I said, yes, sir. He says, you're going to enlist? I said, well, tell me honestly, with the reductions in force that are going to come, we could begin to see it. The Vietnamization process is in place. The theory being, under the Nixon administration, the Vietnamization, we would train them to fully take the battle against the North Vietnamese. And there would be reductions in force. We had, at the peak, there were 543,000 Americans in Vietnam in 1969. And they were cutting those numbers back. And so when the Army cuts back from a major conflict, then you got, the Army just literally fires people. Or if you have high grade, you get busted, demoted, based on the Army needs. So I told the sergeant major, I said, no. He says, you sure I'll get you any job here you want? I know who you are. I know your record. If you want to re-enlist, you get a bonus of, I think at the time it was 5,000, 10,000, I forget, whatever it was. I said, no, I think God sent that asshole in my life for a reason. I've been here 19 months running missions with RT Idaho. I'm just going to go home. He said, okay. I said, I need somebody to pull guard duty for 2 weeks at night. You got it, Sergeant Major. So I pulled guard duty at night, went to the Trang Beach, which was a beautiful beach, and worked on my tan. And then the one traumatic event was the Viet Cong mortared us one night while I was on guard duty, patrolling in the company Jeep, and they took out our ice cream parlor. I mean, just destroyed this thing. And it was really emotional, because all the Remps, the rear echelon mothers, they had to go downtown to get their ice cream. I was really just a sad moment in time. But other than that, came home, processed out, went to Colorado to see my sister, went skiing with her for a couple of days. And then she worked for a car rental company, and she needed a car to be deadheaded back to New York City. So I had her car, saw my cousin in Iowa, visited Doug and his wife Sandra, and then drove back to Trenton. And then, of course, when I got to Trenton, went up to the house at like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning or something, and the front door's locked. We never locked our doors before. Go around to the back door. The back door's locked. So then we had a little shed. So I climbed up on the window, and then there's a little clothes hook where Mom did the laundry, and I did a push-up on the roof and put my jungle boot on a hook, crawled up on the roof, and went through the screen to get into my bedroom, my little brother, who was now taller than me. When I left Vietnam, he was shorter. When I got home, he was taller. So we talked to him for a few minutes, and I went down to my mom and went into her. She woke her up, said, "Mom, how you doing?" Or I just shook her. I didn't talk to her first. And she said, "David," that's my brother, "what do you want? What's going on?" She goes, "David? Oh," because David didn't have a beard yet. So she felt my beard. She goes, "Johnny?" "Oh, Johnny." She goes, "Dad, Johnny's home." So welcome back to Trenton, New Jersey.
Wow.
And that ended the tour of duty in SOG right there.
That's a hell of a second tour.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't believe they kicked you out for something you already had talked about before you even went.
Yeah, and he was corrupt, and eventually he was drummed out of the military because he had forged other officers' signatures for his award. And so we had a young Spec 5, last name Armstrong, and I knew his brother, and his brother had been on Idaho at one point. And this Armstrong did the right thing. He went, turned it into a CID. They launched a full investigation, went to the chain of command, and confronted him with his forged signatures and threw his ass out. Now, because he was a West Point officer, they didn't cut off his pay. They should have been not paying that man, but he did get paid because he was an officer. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, anything else you want to add before we...
No, it's just to this day, I think about RT Idaho, Spike Team Idaho, the early days, Hep and Sal and the boys, not boys, men, but our little people. We affectionately called them little people. And they've been a part of my life ever since. I'm alive thanks to their courage, our TAC Air, the King Bees, and the leadership of Spider Parks. And I rebuild that team the way he did. And Idaho never had a major incident after that. They ran a lot of missions. They did a lot of successful missions. In fact, in that book, I learned things about our Idaho book. Jason Hardy has a series called MACV SOG, and volume 12 is 170 plus pages on Idaho. And they have photographs of them on a mission, which we never would have done. And I learned things from the book about my team. So it's really fascinating. And then, the whole experience of that time, any man I meet today, I still judge him against the men I served with on RT Idaho, particularly in the other SF men. Because, as we said in the first time, we met at the clubhouse where we did a lot of learned lessons there from the senior NCOs who would talk to us young green kids. Between that, Spider, our little people, and went back to school, get back to life. And today, when I talk to Afghan vets, I tell them what you guys went through is horrible on August 26, 2021, which was a political decision strictly by a corrupt administration. And we had another administration in 1975 where Congress cut off the funding that led to the ultimate fall of April 30. And I said that even though we didn't have any of the modern communications, we couldn't do anything. And we were just, what happened to my little people? What happened to Hep and Sal? We never heard, never got any word. Whereas at least in the Afghanistan vets, they're able to Operation, Pineapple Express, In fact, in our SOGcast number 47, we interviewed Tom Lanning, who's our SOGcast Green Beret. He just retired, and when that day went down, he helped over 1,000 people get out. And we have a whole SOGcast on that, including helping a 6-year-old boy to get surgery after he was wounded in the face during that first frantic day in Afghanistan at the airport. And at least they could do something. We couldn't do anything except wait. And I never met Hep again until around 2000, when History Channel did a story called the Suicide Missions. And in it, I had a picture that's on the front page of Across the Fence, the first of my 3 books. And on is Hep's picture. His nephew lived 9 miles from my house in Oceanside at the time. He saw it, called the History Channel. They called me, I called him, called Hep. And then Hep came out for a wedding a couple months after that. I surprised him at the airport. And we went, they had a wedding celebration. I drove up for that the next day. And then the following night, he came down to our house in Oceanside. We had dinner, took a few pictures. And we thought, oh, well, we're still young and full of life. He'll come back. Yeah, we'll come back. We'll do this again. We never did. Never came back to California. And sadly, we lost Hep July 8th, 2017. And we never knew what happened to the other people except for his son, which we just learned about from Lynn, a weekend ago. So that's it. Just that pain and suffering for that, mental.
Is there, if you had one thing, it's the last thing I'll ask you. If you had one thing that you wanted to tell the youth, it could be anything from your life experience, what would it be?
Well, just remember where you live. We live in the United States of America, and despite the division that's in our country now, that division is by design. And you can go to any country in the world, you'll still want to come back to America. And there's still a lot of good Americans here that care about our country, first and foremost. And it's worth fighting for. And I know we're days away from a major election on November 5th. That is something that will shape our country, but don't give up. Always continue to love our country first and foremost, and to do anything we can to improve it. Because every time I've left our country, no matter whether it's Europe, Southeast Asia, Mexico, I was up to Canada a couple times. I was always glad to come home to America. And that's the land of the free and home of the brave. And that ain't going to change. Now, there's people that don't like what we're doing. There's this one world order bullshit going on right now that's really different than what America should be and could be. But hopefully the core, the people that really generally care about our country, not the media, but Americans, continue to march forward and do whatever is right to keep us going forward.
I hope more and more people hear that and pay attention to what's really going on, because all the political bullshit that you see on TV is all theater. It's just there to keep you divided. They don't want people to unite under one flag or one. The New World Order is very real. It's been a thing for a very long time.
And fortunately, thanks to people like Elon Musk and others like that are fearless, Mike Benz comes out with the corruption from the social media side. And now we have podcasters like, Jocko Willink, who funds all of our SOGcasts. That's our history side. And then we have other podcasters like Sean Ryan's show, where he brings these people on. And he even had a higher rating than Joe Rogan. And so there's another media out there that gives the truth out, that people that generally want to look for it.
Yeah, that movement's growing. So
we'll close on God Bless America. And then, of course, my favorite line, which is behind me here, the POW MIA issue, which in my case is very personal. I got my job because a recon team was wiped out. So to this day, there's over 1,573 Americans that are still listed as missing in action in Southeast Asia from the Vietnam War, which includes Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, China, and Thailand. There's only a couple in Thailand and China, which may be aviators. I'm not sure what the story is. And of that 1,573, there's 58 Green Berets that we've documented that are still MIA, that were killed in the secret war in Laos and Cambodia. And there are another 40 Green Berets that were missing in action from traditional Green Beret actions in Vietnam, whether on Mike Force or on the Delta Force or from traditional A camps. We had A camps that got overrun and Green Berets went missing in action. And it's just a very compelling issue that our government is failing to do enough to, and we might as well just say we're never going to see them. And it's just a heartbreak. But that's my personal opinion. And it's near and dear to my heart, and we've carried that personal pain since day one. In my case, it's Glenn Lane and Robert Owen and the little people that were on the team with them. And I just wish the more would be done. Close on that point. Take it from there. God bless America.